Hello everybody, here you are today, joining us again at the National Grid stand. Today is Transport Day. It's all about transport and the decarbonisation of it can help the drive towards net zero. So I'm very pleased today to be joined by Claire Miller, Director of Innovation and Technology at Octopus Energy, also by Graham Cooper, Head of Future Markets at National Grid, and also by Filippo Gaddo, Head of Economics at ARUP. Today is all about transport. That's the big topic of the day. So very pleased today to announce that we published a report produced by ARUP, sponsored by National Grid and Octopus, which is all about talking around and dispelling some of the myths you may have heard and talk about regards to electric vehicles. And that's what the conversation is about today. All about what those concerns you may have, what the reality is about it, and actually what does that look like moving forward. But I think I talked enough, and we've got three esteemed guests here who I know can fill the next half hour for us. So, the first question, which I'm going to put to all of you, Philippe, I'm going to start with you, because your guys produced a report. Was there anything in the report that surprised you?
I think the thing that probably surprised them most is what we started the report with, which is electric vehicles are fun. And I know that people are talking about fun because you got Tesla and all the Elon Musk and all the drive. But they're fun in general because it's good to drive, they got a good acceleration, or even kind of the old petrol head, which are not going to be petrol head, they're going to battery head in the future.
Yeah.
Maybe that's
Good
kind of
hashtag
Jeremy
battery
Clarkson
head.
actually, we should call him battery head in the future. So they are actually enjoying the kind of the drive. So the fun of driving is probably the things that we probably should have known, but it definitely surprised us in the surveys that we do. And the other part, which is probably was not in the report, is something I was listening while I was kind of taking my girls to school, is that they were asking to the kind of the breakfast kind of presenter, to one of the kids, what do they want actually for Christmas? And one of the kids said, I want a Tesla. Okay, that was a big kind of Christmas request, but the fact that actually a 9-year-old child, the big Christmas is a Tesla, I think that tells you a lot.
Nice. What about yourself, Claire? Anything you saw from Octopus? Clearly you're all over this tech and innovation. Anything in there? Any tricks you've got up your sleeve that could help?
Well, yeah, see me after class for the tips. I think in terms of the length of journeys, you hear lots of numbers banded around, but actually to look at how short most people's journeys are on a day-to-day basis, and you start putting that into context of actually, okay, well, what does that mean for you as an individual thinking about getting an EV? It means actually you might have that range anxiety, but how many times do you drive 200 miles in one go? Not that often. How many times would you have to charge in a week? Hardly at all. And I think for me, it was like taking a step back from a lot of figures and looking at the reality of that, putting into context of family life. For most people, it is the short journey to the shops, the short journeys to school, maybe to the station or the bus, the mass transit. Like really thinking about that in the context of people's lives and thinking about like EVs are here, they're real, and you don't need to sort of go any further. Like today's the day to start getting an EV. Yeah.
What about you, Graham?
So I've been in the electricity industry for about 20 years, and using an EV and reading the report, you realise that it will teach you so much. Because the strange thing about energy, or electricity in particular, is you can't smell it, you can't feel it, you can't taste it, you can't touch it. Well, if you touch it, it's probably the last thing you do. So I learned more about about the energy industry by having an EV, because firstly, all of a sudden 250 kilowatts means something. So that's 0 to 60 in 4.6 seconds. And so now in my head that's whee, right? I mean that's but in the same way when somebody says, well, 75 kilowatt hours, well, what is that? Well, I now know in my head that that's 200 miles. So all of a sudden, by having the report that kind of puts together some of those myths and what have you, and by people reading the report, you realise that almost the EV is the opportunity to democratise energy. You can be a participant in it. You can choose when to charge, so you can have a smart tariff. You can choose where to charge. Do you charge at work? Do you charge at home? And all of these things are picked up in the report. There's not one magic silver bullet, but it just taught me a lot about energy. And for someone who's got an MBA in energy, I learned probably more by driving an EV. And I think that's really what comes out in the report is you sort of have to experience it. And that will bust some of your myths, but you kind of need to have it written down first, and then you try it and you realise that the report actually is right.
And the good thing that we ended up with that kind of your point about feeling and experiencing the kind of vehicle to grid. I know we are at the beginning of that, and we didn't major on in the report because it's a new technology. We almost left it open at the end, say, and there is that big opportunity. You almost call for a kind of full charge 2.0 at some point to actually go through in the next phases when people get even more engaged. And as you say, they understand the energy better because they understand the vehicle is not just a way for me to move around.
Yes.
I can actually use it for a lot of other stuff.
Yeah, well, I was going to say Power Loop's very close to my heart. That's a project that I look after and deliver. And actually, that when we see people starting to think about vehicle to grid, or even thinking about smart charging their EVs, which means timing the charge to happen at a time when there's a lot of green energy on the grid and the tariff is cheap, it starts to make you think about how you use energy in the whole of your life. So I would really support what you said there.
It's sort of
really makes you think.
democratisation.
Yeah,
I mean, if you think about it, for our entire life, we've had energy done to us. You know, you get a bill at the end of the month and it looks like a tax return, a whole bunch of numbers you don't understand. There's a pain point, right?
Yeah.
But if you can bust that myth and you feel what energy feels like, and then you can play a part in that, you're actually now a participant in the energy system. It's not, it's not done to you. And I think that there's something quite liberating in that, and you can be an active participant and really get into the geekery if that's your thing. But at the same time, if you're not into the geekery, you can outsource it to smart energy provider to do the geekery for you.
Just from what you mentioned then, Power Loop. Talk us a little bit more around that. When can we all start getting involved in that? What's that going to look like? How are you going to feel for it?
Sure. So Power Loop is vehicle to grid. It's saying that you can't just put energy into the battery. You can get the energy out of the battery, and you can choose at what time you do that. And it's starting to get people thinking about the time at which you use energy is important.
Yes.
And to your point about democratizing, for most of our lives, we've not really thought about the timing of our use of energy. If you want to put the light on, you put the light on. It costs you the same at midnight as midday. And we're getting into a world now where that's just not true. And so for the consumer, thinking about the time at which they use energy is, I think, the next step. And quite quickly after that, it's, okay, well, how do I put energy back on the grid? So vehicles that can do this exist right now. So the Nissan Leaf is capable of doing vehicle to grid, and the equipment to enable the car to put the energy back in the home is starting to come to market. So the trial's been about, what does it feel like for the customer to go on the journey of getting that equipment fitted, starting to use it, and actually us as an operator thinking about what services do we provide. I think in terms of how does that go from here to being mass market, I think over the next 5-6 years we're going to see the OEMs, the manufacturers of vehicles, starting to talk more and more about our cars are vehicle to grid ready. They are able to put energy back into your home and back onto the grid, and then we'll see a whole ecosystem kind of, the next level of innovation will be around that innovation and ecosystem around the home, the local network, so all the cables that connect your home to the local grid, and then obviously up to the national level, which is where National Grid comes in, and thinking about how we access all of these vehicles, the thousands and thousands of EVs that are rolling out right now. How do we access them, and how do we actually use those batteries to start to balance the local and national grid? So Power Loop is very small, but we've proved an awful lot already, and we're proving the business models and the customer experiences, those customer journeys that we will scale up. So keep watching. Over the next sort of 5, 6, 7 years, you're going to see and hear more and more about this.
And what about that? I mean, you've touched on it, Graham, where customers now, they're not engaging on two levels. With the vehicle, I want to buy a new car, I need a new car.
Yep.
But also I'm engaging with my electricity supplier. And that's like, oh my God, I've got to think of two things at the same time. How are consumers ready for that thought process? How are we going to get them there?
I often use the disruption that we're going through is a bit like going from an old Nokia 6310 buttons and text messages.
Yes.
You didn't know you needed a smartphone until somebody showed you a smartphone, and you went, "Oh, now I need one." I mean, I think there's that quote, is it from Henry Ford? If you ask people what they wanted when they had a horse, they just said a faster horse, right? So I think to answer your question, there's an element here which is you don't know what you don't know, and if someone can show you, right, and this is where actually your Octopus Electric Vehicles team are really good. So they do these road shows where they bring a whole bunch of EVs, and you can come and just have a play. And what you often find is people jump in and they have a little drive and they just go, want, right? It's that almost that iPhone moment, or smartphone moment. And I think the minute you get over that, you then say, well, how am I going to then charge it? Well, it's not like, I can charge it when I'm sleeping, or I can charge when it's at the station. So it's not like swapping a hydrocarbon, petrol or diesel, for electricity. It's actually just changing the way you do this. So the strange thing for me is I charge my car when I sleep. So it means I'm not actually having to go and charge a car. Or if I needed to go a bit further and I'm stopping at my office, I go to my office and I plug it in when I start my day, and when I put my briefcase in at the end of the day, the car's full. Well, in which case it's almost no different to your mobile phone. You know, you get to your desk and you plug it in whether it needs charging or not.
And it goes back to the key principle. Innovation is about creating something new, and in a sense, you don't kind of tell people to stop using something. You give them something better. Yes, I think regulation definitely has something to do in terms of stopping people buying kind of petrol and diesel vehicle. But actually giving us something which is better with a good experience is the faster way actually to get there. You don't simply say, well, that's bad. You say, well, give you something which is much better, and then naturally they will want it.
Yes.
And that's what will happen with electric vehicle. And I think I always say that S-curve of electric vehicle, at the moment we are probably on that bottom part. How do you ramp it up is when everybody will want it.
Yes.
And that's where kind of the big change will happen. And at that point, you will have the little virtual loop as well of, which is very important, the car dealership, the second-hand vehicle, which is one part that we looked at in the report. That's kind of busting some of the myth about kind of the fact that you can't actually get a second-hand, but you can. So when you get that circle going on, then suddenly all the ecosystem about vehicle and mobility will become electric, will become natural for everybody to do that.
So on that as well, so again, and the report picks up on this. How do I get my mum, who just goes out to buy her car, she gets rid of her Skoda, whatever she's driving these days. How do I get her to convince her that buying an EV is the right thing from a cost perspective? If you look at that front cost, an EV is today more expensive on like for like than a petrol or diesel car. But when you look at the report and the whole system cost, whole lifetime cost, actually an EV works out cheaper in the long run. How do we need to get people to think differently? No, it's not that upfront. So how do we get people there? What's your thoughts?
I think there are two types of buyers. There is the buyers that will buy a car up front, and then there are the lease model. I think if you're on the lease model, it's a bit easier because the car company with the lease will actually make you a deal by which actually per month, and potentially they will throw in actually the electricity and the fuel. So per month actually you will say it doesn't make a difference, very little. And then you can choose how much you pay up front, like you do now. You can choose to put a deposit for 1,000, 2,000, then you get a slightly lower kind of monthly rate. It will be the same. So if that becomes the model by which actually people buy electric vehicle, I don't think there'll be a big change, and you will get over that kind of a little bit of anxiety and perception that they're very expensive, because over time for the people that buy up front, which there are some of them, that's where potentially some of the incentives, something might actually help in the early stages as well. But it will be different type, and you need to target the customers very carefully.
I would say the interesting thing for me is I was always one of those people who'd save up. I'd buy a 2 or 3 year old car, so the depreciation on a bit, and then I'd drive it till the wheels dropped off, right? I mean, till there was a really big bill. But my electric car is the first car I will never own. Because, well, firstly, I thought, well, I'm an early adopter. And if you look at a 4-year-old, 5-year-old piece of tech, you kind of go, oh, it's a bit clunky. So I thought, would it date? And then I was a little nervous about depreciation because is it going to be worth more or less? You know, what's that look like? And so by flipping from ownership to a lease model, someone else took all of that risk away from me. And actually, because charging was so cheap and the maintenance was almost non-existent, in 45,000 miles, all I did was put 4 tyres on it and a wiper blade, right? Actually, it was incredibly cheap to run, but it felt like mobility as a service. I paid one price per month, and it just worked. And so I think if even an old dinosaur, I mean, I've put myself in as an old petrol head, right? If I can go through that process and enjoyed it, and it was all right, and it wasn't too painful, I'd do it again. So I think there is that element of, you know, if you're thinking about the advice to your mum, firstly, does she really need to make the switch now? Or maybe if she's not doing a lot of mileage, maybe a couple of years, and that's how she'll access it. But that doesn't mean she can't experience it and start to become informed and participate in it. But it is, I think, that buy it, own it model is a generational thing. You know, my kids don't buy records or tapes. I mean, this is aging me now. They just they just stream music. It's music as a service. So they don't feel like they need to own something. I just need to get somewhere. So I think we are set for potentially quite a lot of business model innovation, a bit of disruption into the way we do it. But I think it could be disruption in a good one.
I think there's lots of disruption to come in the business models, like the ownership models or non-ownership.
Yep.
You know, absolutely. Things like, you know, the second-hand market. I think we haven't even started to explore the second-hand leasing of vehicles. And I think, you know, the battery that's in the car, that's the thing to think about. That I think, again, if you're having this chat with your mum, it's thinking about the battery itself is a valuable part of the car because you can do so many things with it, because you can store energy in there, and in the future you'll be able to access that energy or decide when you use it to store energy. And that's valuable in itself, that's a bit mind-blowing. So it's sort of thinking about, okay, what does that mean? Well, it means that we want to keep hold of that battery because it will have 1 or 2, maybe even 3 lease life cycles. So it will go through like 2 or 3 of those cycles, and then getting that battery out of the car, and then it can become a battery in someone's home, for example. So you've got to start thinking about different ways that you can own the car, and owning all of it and all the metal and all the bits. Actually, it's probably not going to be the model for the next sort of 20, 30, 40 years. And then also thinking about how do I get a cheaper lease cost if you're leaning into this leasing model. How do I get a cheaper lease cost for promising to make my car available to store energy? So there's lots of innovation coming, which right now you just can't imagine because people are still quite wedded to owning their car. So it's going to be, I think, a transformation in the way that people see the car as mobility as a service.
And that was a question raised to me the other day. They said, "Oh, my iPhone's 2 years old, or my whatever, my Samsung's 2 years old. Oh, the battery's not very good." Well, the cars are just the same. So I was with somebody from, it happened to be Tesla in this instance, and they said, "Well, hang on, let's just look up the highest mileage cars." One of their higher mileage cars that they've got in the US, 320,000 miles, and it's only lost 2 or 3
Tesla.
Tesla, only a handful of percentage of the range of the car, and you're like, wow. I mean, if that was a petrol or diesel car, it would probably be on its 3rd engine rebuild by that point. And I think to some extent, the report is actually busting our own myths. We don't know what we don't know until we explore it and say it. And the minute it's written down, well, it sort of becomes more of a fact. And that's why I think it's important that organisations such as ours continue to champion the good fight. But we also end up with sort of experts who are independent of that, sanity checking those facts to make sure that we're not greenwashing, we're not over-promising and under-delivery. And actually, I think it really anchors the report in some solid things that actually stand up to whatever scrutiny you want to throw at it. But you can only get there when you get different entities and different businesses collaborating around challenging some of those misconceptions.
A little bit on that. So I've had an EV now pure EV since September, and it is bloody amazing. Right? It's really nice to drive, and it's a lot quicker than you realise. You can look and think, oh my god, I should be doing that speed. So all our range anxiety just disappears very, very quickly.
Yep.
But I get anxiety from charging points, right? Numerous apps, you turn it, you've got the wrong app, you then try and download the app, you can't, there's no 4G signal, the charger's not working, you go to another one, there's a car park there's already finished charging, it shouldn't be there. How are we going to develop the charging infrastructure rapidly enough? Because the rate that we sell in EVs is going to actually outstrip that supply point with regards to charging points. What do we need to do?
I mean, you asked earlier on the beginning, Craig, about the supplies. In a sense, the number of charging points has gone up massively.
Yes.
We looked back at some of the analysis some of them done 2 or 3 years ago, and actually, nobody realized it, but there are actually more than people were thinking 3 years ago. So it has gone up. So charging anxiety, there are a lot of charging. Having said that, there is a bit of a mixed bag still, if I have to be honest, about charging, because some of them are quite in the early stages. As you replace those and you get new ones, you would overcome that. The main point is making the consumer experience very easy and simple. So you need to be able to go there and kind of plug it in, tap your card, and then just charge it. That's the main point. I don't think necessarily get the infrastructure there. I think the infrastructure, there are challenges, but it will be deployed with the Project Rapid and some of the work you've been doing with actually as well on motorways and railroads. No more than 25 miles from a rapid charge. I think that will happen. That will be very important. And actually having that in the report, people know actually, do you need to be more than 25 miles from a petrol station today? No. So you're actually fine. But it's more about, well, when I get there, I want to make sure that I can charge. Okay, I know now it's there, but I want to make sure. And that, I think, is where I think the busting that perception that, I can't find it, I think would be very, very important. And then you move to the experience.
I think it's quite interesting. So today's Transport Day at COP, so it's really obviously an exciting day for us that are involved in transport. I think in terms of helping people feel confident about infrastructure, we still haven't seen any targets set for rolling out infrastructure. I think that's really important to say, is that there are targets now for when there'll be a ban on selling ICE vehicles, and it will only be able to sell battery vehicles, not just cars, but also trucks and other kinds of goods vehicles. We still don't have a target around infrastructure, and I think that's probably is one of the things that will give people more confidence, is to see this is the rollout plan, this is what's coming. So I think that's something to keep an eye out for. Maybe later this afternoon. We're still hopeful we'll get some announcements. You never know.
Yep.
But in the gap between a target and the government and I guess local authorities rolling stuff out, you have the private companies as well.
Yeah.
And I think there are a lot of private companies now that can see, it's really important to be adding infrastructure at different levels, right? So we don't necessarily need the top of the range, incredibly high charging rates. We need easily to access charging points where you're going to be leaving your car. So I think it's definitely coming.
Yes.
It's definitely rolling out. And I think then in terms of the technology itself, there are lots of products springing up to improve the life of the kind of public charger user. So RFID cards are consolidating, apps are consolidating, and as Octopus we have our own charging product for customers. We have Electric Juice Network, which allows you to use the network and be charged on your energy bill. What's coming next is an automatic handshake between vehicles and chargers. So it's plug and charge, where you won't even have to touch an app or touch an RFID card. So for the customers at home who are thinking it's too complicated, our apps and God knows what, actually pretty soon you don't have to do anything. You just literally plug in your vehicle, it will charge, and you will get charged separately. So the process is becoming so much simpler and so much quicker and easier. So there's lots and lots of innovation coming. Sort of just kind of watch around you, keep an eye on your local streets. You've got lamp-post charging, you've got on-street charging. All kinds of different charges are coming, so it's really exciting.
I also think the one thing that we've not really seen yet is one or two people who've been early adopters have that experience anxiety. So it's not no longer range anxiety, it's experience anxiety. But what even I see in talking to government is they acknowledge that this is an issue. So what you'll start to see, so I sit on the government's EV Energy Task Force, which is it's great because it's EV and it's about the transport industry, but they're asking energy people for their advice. So you're bringing three industries together, right? Energy, transport and digital. But one of the conclusions was that experience anxiety. So what you're likely to see probably by about Easter next year is actually minimum requirements for reliability of chargers. So that should dial out the experience anxiety. Now, at one extreme, National Grid is 99.99987 reliable. Right, so if you do the maths,
have you got the right 9?
It's 87. That's important. That's less than 7 seconds a year, right? That's a very high bar. So I don't think that the charging experience will have to have that higher bar. But it's important that you get that consistency of standard, right? Because what you need as an EV driver is confidence. And the only way you get confidence is if charging is where you expect to see it, and the experience is consistent. So continuity and consistency is really important. And by having a target standard, which you can't run and hide from, it's a minimum target, and people will do better than. But if you've got a minimum target, what that should do reasonably quickly is get to a point where you will have you won't have that experience anxiety.
And if I can, is your point about the target and actually the thing from today, for me, it would be more important to have a minimum standard than actually say, I need to have 35,000 kind of charging points. Because the number of charging points will happen, provided there is a standard, provided the experience. And the private companies will want to make the best for the customer because they need the customers. Right?
Yep.
So you make the minimum standards and then let the company actually kind of beat it, rather than saying kind of, you need X amount of charges, because you can put them in, but it could be not particularly good. But if you've got a minimum standard, they have to have that, and that's the kind of guarantee that people will take up.
So you mentioned about what's going to come out today. You probably know more of this diagram. So apparently this morning it was announced that zero emission HGVs by 2040. Global commitment to end the sale of petrol and diesel by 2040 globally, leading countries by 2035. UK is pushing for 2030. What are our initial thoughts on that? Is that quick enough, fast enough?
So let's pick up on the trucks. So that's the first thing you mentioned. So trucks are only 1% of the transport on the roads, right? But they produce 18% of the emissions. So although cars are more important to fix, we're on that journey to fix them. With trucks at the moment, there's not really there's one or two products that we see outside, but it's really difficult to know which is the winning technology. So firstly, the fact that you put a line in the sand that says there won't be, and what's interesting is they've done it in 2 steps. So actually, trucks up to and including 26 tons. Now that's quite a big truck. It's 2035. The big HGVs is 2040. So there's a glide path into this. But the other thing that when I see that is what that does is that gives certainty to a market. So it's not saying thou shalt. It says by here you can't. So what you see now across industry is the trucking industry is now reaching out to the energy networks industry saying, we've got to do this by then, what are you doing? And actually what it's doing is it's stimulating collaboration. But all of this ultimately needs to be paid for, and investment needs to know that the risk has a cost. So investment needs to know they're not going to waste money on something that won't get there. So actually what I'm really encouraged by is I don't need a government to say you absolutely have to do each of these steps. But if you set the things that government can set, which is a deadline, a target, we get certainty, and then the commercial industry will then work to that certainty. And so that's really, really important. And actually National Grid's involved in 3 trials. So there's a £20 million trial to say, could the answer be hydrogen for trucks?
Yeah.
Could it be catenary, like the trains, the overhead catenary? Or could it be battery electric? And actually it's probably going to be a mix. But until you test trucks in anger, how do you know? So actually we're really encouraged. They put £20 million into doing these trials. The industry is collaborating and rolling up its sleeves to try this. But even then, what you realise is it doesn't matter whether, if it's a battery truck, it needs a grid connection. If it's a hydrogen truck, it needs electricity to make the hydrogen, so it needs a grid connection. If it's an overhead catenary, it needs a grid connection. So the conversation we're having now with government is, why don't you get us building the wires next to the motorway whilst the market works out what the winning technology is? And that actually means that by the time there is a winning technology, the infrastructure, the underlying infrastructure, the grid is there and ready, rather than waiting to fix who the winner is and then we start. Because big infrastructure takes time. So even the fact that we're having those conversations gives me an element of hope that, I know Greta Thunberg's comment is it's blah, blah, blah. Well, you could say the statement is blah, blah, blah. But we're rolling up our sleeves, working with industry on actually making the blah, blah, blah actual reality. And that's the bit that I feel is missing, is people aren't seeing the hard work that the industry is doing to take the words and take that into action.
Sorry, go on.
No, thank you. Well, I was going to say, if you look at the statement that the government have released with these figures and with these targets, keep scrolling. So if you're looking at that, it's available on the government website. Keep scrolling. It's kind of an easy read, and you'll see the different parties that have signed up to these and who's contributed to. It's not just governments. A is big governments. B is the emerging nations. Keep going, and you look at the manufacturers who have signed up to this. Have a look and see who signed up to it and who hasn't signed up to it. It's going to happen, and we want it to happen faster. And I think it's really interesting to see which manufacturers are kind of embracing that, running towards it and going, you know what, it's going to be incredibly hard, and we don't have all the answers.
No,
we're going to have to collaborate.
Yep.
Some of these technologies don't exist, or they haven't been proven, or it's going to be massive infrastructure, but we have to go for it, and we have to do it, because there is no other option here. So I think it's really interesting to see, the ones who are saying it's too hard, we can't do it, we're not sure, or maybe we should just have a look and see who's going for it and who isn't going for it. I think that says a lot about their commitments, and actually we can't know now. But we'll look back in sort of 20 years time and we'll see, we'll be able to join the dots of, the early adopters to the embracers to how they did it. And I think that will come through in their products and services as well. And we'll start to see, embracing it, to your point about action and blah, 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 is about seeing the actions, seeing the products come to market, seeing the services come to market, and giving people the opportunity to start getting involved and start embracing it. So yeah, we're gonna see a lot coming through now, I think, from today's announcement.
And going back to your point, is it fast enough? I'm actually preferring starting from a slightly later 2040 and then accelerating. I think everybody say when government will announce a 2040 for the petrol, it's probably better. A, because you need to give some time actually for the industry to prepare, because there are natural life cycles of some of the assets and the equipment, but also gives the opportunity to accelerate it like government did. If you set up a target 2025, everybody think you can't do it and it will ignore it.
Yes.
If instead you start from a point 2040, set kind of market down, see the industry reaction, and slowly start the time filling up, it's probably actually better, and you will get there faster. So you get the industry prepared, give you the ground actually to make the acceleration later on, and it's much better. And one final point on AGV, we're actually preparing a report with Energy UK actually on the future of AGV and different technologies. So watch this space.
Certainly one to watch out for. I mean, the one thing that struck me in all of this is societal behaviour. So I was on the train on the way up to COP, because of course doing the right thing for travel. And on the way up, I got chatting to somebody next to me, and we were just talking about what they did and what I did. And midway through the conversation, they said, "Oh, I'm really sorry, I drive a diesel." hang on, why are you apologising to me? And so one of the things I think we've not seen yet is there's an element here of acceptability and do you need government to stop you doing something, or just by signalling will people go, oh, okay, the change is coming, and there'll actually be consumer pull, because actually genuinely people want to do the right thing, they want to do a better thing. So do you actually, will we actually see somebody turning up on the very last day and saying, I want to buy a diesel car? Or are you going to turn around and say, well, actually, we've stopped selling diesel cars years before because no one's buying them? And for me, that will be the most exciting thing to see, right? But I also think the other point here is there's a bit of normalisation. So I don't know whether you're aware, but peak demand on energy, that middle of the evening thing has sort of, everybody's taken a part in reducing that. And that's LED light bulbs, right? Now, often people say, well, on the journey to net zero, we're going to be living in caves, in the dark, wearing a loincloth, chewing grass, right? Well, actually, we've taken a huge dent into energy just by light bulbs. We still sit in the light, right? I mean, we're still there. And I think there's an element here of normalisation. So at the moment, people go, electric cars, exciting, different. Probably in 4 or 5 years, you'll go, I've bought a blue car. You won't talk about what powers it. In the same way, you don't go into your local DIY store and say, can I have a climate-friendly, super high-tech, low-energy LED light bulb? Can I have a bayonet or a screw fitting? I mean, we've sort of normalised that. So I think there's an element here that how will that process take place? And when will this be normal? And I think it could come sooner than we think. And that's why I think that combination of social behaviour and normalising is probably the bit that we don't really know enough about.
That was the core of the report, actually, to actually normalise the experience of actually electric vehicle and showing with hard numbers that is normal. And then probably this report, to be honest, in 5 years' time will be unnecessary because we'll be in a different place. But today is very important.
Absolutely.
What about from our perspective, I guess, then, Claire, where back to Graham's point, it becomes a service. How do people know they're buying a service from Octopus? I'm not just buying electricity. I'm not just buying electric juice cars. What's that going to look like? What are customers saying?
What's a service? I think that's a huge question in itself. I think it's about giving access to energy in a way that has never been done before. I think it's going back to your point about democratising energy, and I think I look back to about 10 years ago now. I was involved with a company called Alert Me, which ultimately became Hive, so bought by a century ago. And at that time, giving people access to their boilers when they weren't in their homes, and giving them access to their heating when they were on holiday and coming back, it was completely revolutionary, because this big box just stood in the corner of your kitchen, and it was something that you just had to put up with. It totally revolutionised the way that people thought about heating and controlling of heat. And now here we are with energy and thinking about how we revolutionise the way that we use energy to move ourselves around. And soon we'll be thinking about energy to heat our homes. So we think about electricity to heat our homes. And I think that in terms of the services, it's about giving you access to the things that you own or you lease or you rent in a way that you couldn't do before. So will there be an app? Of course there are apps, ubiquitous app access, and the app gives you access remotely, gives you access in a really easy and straightforward way, and it takes away the pain for you. So we said it before, but as customers thinking it's too complicated and I don't know where to start, we're living in an age where we're building these apps and services for the customers. And what customers are saying they want is, I want it to be easy, I want it to be set and forget, I want to save money, please, thank you, and I want it to be fun. And so that's what we're doing, is we're making it really easy for you to see, when can I charge, how expensive will it be, where can I charge, are the charges working, is it busy? So putting all of those things together to give you a place to understand your world around you. And I think that's also what it's about, surfacing the information when you need it. Where can I charge? How long will it take? What time is it, and should I charge now? Should I wait till later? So I think that's what people are going to see coming through.
I mean, it really demonstrates that we've got three industries coming together, right? Yeah. So normally, the energy industry just worries about energy, and transport worries about transport, and digital worries about how your computer works. But when you start to think about it, what we've got is a strange convergence, right? So for the transition that we're in, that we're all here for, and through the lens of transport, you're bringing three industries together, and it's only when all three come together do you get success. So you've got energy, transport, and digital. And you could argue that the app, or for Octopus, the super secret sauce is Kraken, their platform underneath, is almost the glue that glues transport and energy, is the digital piece. But also, the digital piece is it allows us mere mortals to understand the magic that's going on. I mean, even we as National Grid launched the When to Plug In app. Yeah. If people don't know that the grid is dirtier at times of the day, and therefore they might not want to plug their car in and run their dishwasher and do it at a better time, but somebody tell me when it's cleaner, you don't know what you don't know. And that digital experience is just one of those steps. But the thing I find is I, at home, so I'm paid to do this stuff, but I also do it at home. So I have Octopus Energy, and I have an app to run some of my things at home that looks to their cost. But my app also looks to National Grid's carbon intensity to say when's the grid dirty or clean. And so when you bring the two together, I want to do things when the grid is clean and cheap. So I can do it without guilt and cheapest. But it's the digital piece that allows that to happen. And that's why I think really, this is a three-legged stool and the legs need to be even. It's energy, transport and digital. And I think that really demonstrates why, you've got different businesses like ours collaborating, because we realise that you can't fix it on your own, and the car manufacturers can't fix it on their own, and the energy industry can't fix it. We have to collaborate for success.
So, conscious of time then, and conscious we are at COP today, we've got a couple of announcements already. You see the news this morning, our esteemed Prime Minister Boris Johnson has come back up to Glasgow to give one final push to get COP over the line. But if you guys had the opportunity to ask the world leaders to announce one thing in the next few days around transport that will really push that drive and that transition to electric vehicles, whether it be HGV or domestic, what would you ask for? So one by one, what would you ask the world leaders for to announce?
I'm happy to pile in. I think on the principle that the polluter pays, what we should do is move costs and taxes away from the good stuff towards the more dirty stuff. So from an energy perspective, a lot of the green subsidies sit on electricity bill payers, but the grid is electricity is getting cleaner. So I think you'll start to see some of those costs move away over the next 10 years off electricity, which is getting better, and on to gas. But in the same way, if you're going polluter pays, put a bit more pressure on the price of petrol and diesel, which makes the electric car even more attractive. So I think as long as the principle is that you start to put pressure on polluter pays, you'll get a lot of the right sort of outcomes.
Yeah, I think that's a really good one. And actually, we're grappling with the transition in terms of government funding, particularly in the UK. How do we move from, a very lucrative, oil and gas kind of taxes coming in from the transport we use now, and how we're going to look at that. But I think in terms of what I'd like to see, if I had my wish or my one question, it would be around what you're going to hear more about, which is this ZEV mandate. So ZEV, zero emissions vehicles mandates, and that's about setting, I guess, like the next level of target for manufacturers. So the big announcements and the dates and the, by 2035, by 2040. The next level is, I think, what will focus the action, which is government setting a level of sales for those zero emission vehicles across the different classes and categories, and that is a kind of a positive. It's the carrot. It's the carrot rather than the stick, which is you've got to get to this many vehicles in this year, and then this many, and then this many, and that actually I feel like getting those numbers honed down. I'd like to see a lot more detail on that, and we will do, but I'd like to see it faster, because that focuses the OEMs and manufacturers, focuses their thoughts. And actually, we've heard a bit about chip shortages as well. I'm sure people are hearing about, I can't get this, I can't get the Xbox for Christmas, or I can't get the PlayStation, I can't deal with that sort of stuff. Those chips are in electric vehicles. In fact, there are a lot of chips in electric vehicles. It's starting to impact how many vehicles we can make and how many can be sold around the world. And actually, when you have those mandates, you have those much more granular numbers, it starts to make the manufacturers think, why am I bothering to make those petrol and diesel cars? I've only got a certain amount of raw materials, I've only got a certain number of chips and materials to go into those. I need to make my ZEV target, I need to make more electric vehicles. So that, for me, that's what I'd like to see.
It's difficult not to repeat what has been said. Very, very two good points. I'm going to focus on the positive again, and I will want something which is linking to the theme of it's not just about transportation. Innovation Day is about the whole system, and I will focus on innovation. And yesterday was actually the Innovation Day, and I would say for leaders actually to get a focus on innovation, whether it's a global platform for innovation, how do you do that? Going back to your point about chips, how do you make better chips? How do you actually improve the supply chain through some level of innovation? Getting SMEs to work better, is it going to be actually some sort of incentive for kind of small SMEs actually to work better? Remove some barriers actually to that. Focus on innovation, and that because it focuses on the positive, focus on jobs, growth. That's what we will need to do in the future.
Thank you very much. Thanks, guys. So that concludes our panel this afternoon, which is all about busting those myths on EVs. Hopefully that's been really useful to you. Just like to thank Filippo, Claire and Graham for their time today. So we have some really strong messages today. It's all about we all make that transition from driving petrol and diesel to electric vehicles. Back to Filippo's words, I absolutely love turning us from petrol heads into battery heads. But also about how we and how you can engage more with the energy use. So it's all about bringing those different energy vectors together, so energy, transport and digital. So hopefully that's been enough information for you to get off the seat, go out there and look at the next electric vehicle, nip down to the showroom. Forget the Transport Day, doesn't end here today. Very pleased to announce that later today will be the global premiere of Fully Charged video, which we've commissioned with Fully Charged and with National Grid. So do tune in for that. It will be available on YouTube later today. So thanks once again to Filippo, Claire and Graham for joining me today. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you.